Chapter 9 is all about prospecting. Prospecting is basically identifying and developing potential customers to create accounts and enhance long term relationships. For every individual and company and industry, the profile of a prospect may differ. It's an individual or business who meets the qualification criteria established by you or your company, and that may vary depending on the circumstances. Before qualifying a customer or a prospect, you need to understand what are the reasons that customers leave their current providers or might leave your business. One thing to consider is that perhaps they're coming to you because it's a one-time need, one and done. They're only going to need your service this one time, so they may not be real loyal. Another problem might be that they move, or you might move your territory, or they might move outside of your territory and provide their business to someone else. Maybe they've had a business failure or a merger that's affected them economically. Something that happens very often that causes salespeople to completely start over is that the employee that's in charge of the buying has changed. It's a new person. Even though you may have been doing business with a company for years, as soon as the buyer changes, you're back to square one in terms of developing that relationship. Or perhaps maybe you've had some changes in competition in your area and you've lost some customers to competition. It's important to understand these reasons. As a new salesperson, especially, you need to understand what are the sources of finding prospects. Very often, early in salespeople's careers, you're given the list that has the either lowest number of customers or the least profitable customers. And so you're going to be expected to build lists. So, how do you do that? Referrals, obviously, from current customers, friends and families, industry directories, just going down through the names that are listed, trade publications or industry publications, trade shows, direct response marketing, websites, databases, cold calling, your own networking, seminars, and non-sales prospecting. There are a lot of ways, even at ground zero, to develop a new pipeline of potential opportunities. What I want you to understand is that you don't wait the business to come to you. You have to go after it. So if you were starting a prospect list, how could you use your own centers of influence to begin? So what do we mean by centers of influence? It's really what we just talked about. So for example, if you are selling cars, well, you drive a car, you know other people that drive cars. Probably most of the people in your family drive cars. Maybe your current boss drives a car. Maybe your old boss drives a car. Your neighbor, maybe the person that you buy your tires from for your car. There are lots of opportunities, even if you don't have a lot of big industry connections, right? So you have to think of what are the connections that I do have. I can start there. And if that is not a broad enough base, how do I increase that base? So here's an example of an opportunity to network or utilize something to broaden the prospect list. This is an example of a Bentley, right? And what Bentley does for some of their sales networking for their cars is they will host a special event at the Le Mans race in France, which is a 24-hour race. Another opportunity is trade shows. If there is one thing that I could stress to you that is underutilized by individuals, it's trade shows. Marketing people spend a lot of time putting together nice booths, good materials for trade shows. But if you go to a trade show as a salesperson or a marketing person, you have to have a plan to organize your time. Think about, are there appointments that I could set up with other people that I know that are going to be at this trade show? How could I use the app that's used at this trade show to generate prospects or connect with other people? How can I connect with people at the breakfast or the cocktail hours or the special events? Don't just show up to a trade show and hope that someone's going to come to your booth. Have a strategy and you will leverage the most bang for your buck with a trade show. Another opportunity today that wasn't available 10 or 15 years ago was social media. LinkedIn has come a long way in terms of providing networks professionally. So I would challenge each of you to think about, number one, do I have a LinkedIn account? If you don't, you should. Number two, how can I leverage that and make some additional connections through that before I graduate? Other opportunities are Twitter. Connect with influencers in the industry. If you're selling, again, in the automotive industry, who are some industry influencers in Twitter that you could follow? Follower Wonk is one. I'm not as familiar with it, but it's available. TweetDeck, that again is an interface that uses Twitter. Hootsuite, Sprout Social, and so many more. All of your social media you should be leveraging. What is cold calling? This is one area that's extremely uncomfortable, especially for rookie salespeople. Cold calling is going in cold to a potential customer or prospect. You have no personal connection. You utilize this method when you have very limited industry connections and networking opportunities. We've heard from other salespeople that cold calling is probably not the optimal way to gain viable prospects, but there are opportunities to utilize cold calling where you can start to build a list. I'll give you an example. When I sold advertising in my 20s for a television station, I had very few industry connections. We would run a promotion for our station that we would have a little flyer, and I would pick a town. I would maybe drive to Robinson, Illinois or Brazil, Indiana, and I would just start going into businesses. Did it take a lot of time? Yes. Did I get a lot of business the first time I went out? No, but I did land some new accounts just by the sheer volume of the people that I visited. And building those relationships with those accounts that I was able to start, I eventually got a list that was workable, that could provide a decent income. When you go into a meeting that's a cold call, you typically want to have some sort of organized elevator presentation that's ready to go. So know what you want to talk about and be ready to go. The other thing that's important is to realize that you don't want just sheer numbers for prospects or new customers. You want to be able to maximize the value of the time spent calling on customers. So you want to identify those good referrals. Meet as many people as you can, tell them what you do, and try to network them and build a relationship. And then connect with them in a way that you can follow up with them later. So when you're first networking, now this does depend on the situation, but try to build a relationship first, provide your business card, and then find an opportunity or a reason to follow up with them later so that you can have another point of contact or connection. Here's a networking model that's really important to understand. This goes back to your centers of influence. You need to network within your organization as a salesperson. So as a salesperson, you would want to know the quality person, the people manufacturing the product or the service. Definitely have a good relationship with the customer service personnel and the marketing personnel, because you're going to depend on all of those people to make the sale. You need to network within your industry. So again, if you're working in the automotive industry, what are some other connections within the automotive industry or boards that you could serve on within the automotive industry that could help you? Understand who those influencers are in your industry so you can help to drive business to your organization. And then networking outside of your industry. Maybe there are connecting industries. So if I'm working in the automotive industry, are there connections within maybe the lighting industry as it relates to automotive lights that might be helpful? So think strategically and make sure that you're properly networked in all three circles. Make sure that you qualify a prospect. And this is the process of identifying prospects who appear to have a need for your product and should be contacted. You don't want to continue to just connect with people for volume. Make sure that you're spending your time wisely and that the person that you're talking to or the organization that you're talking to, you're fulfilling a valid need for them or could have the potential to fulfill a valid need for them. In order to properly qualify a customer or a prospect, there's some questions that you can ask to help guide the discussion and to guide your strategy. Think about, does this prospect or account have a need for my product? You don't want to sell transactionally. You want to create value in relationships. Does this person have the authority to buy my product? You may meet somebody really interesting and charismatic at a trade show, but they may not have the authority to buy your product. So how do you get past that person and get connected to the person who has the true authority? Does this organization have financial resources to buy my product? If you're an expensive $30,000 product and this organization only has a $5,000 budget, it's not a good fit. You're wasting your time. At least on that product. I mean, there might be a different product that might be a better fit, but you don't want to sell them something that's outside of their capability of financing or paying for. And does this organization have the willingness to buy my product? This one can be a little bit more tricky. Very often you need to read between the lines. You can spend a lot of time trying to nurture a prospect that may never have the intention to buy your product. So you need to ask really good questions so again that you don't waste your time. So let's give some examples here. Here are several different industries that you could ask different qualifying questions that can really help you get to a stronger understanding of the need for the customer and how close they are to pulling the trigger on making a decision or getting information. So for example, in residential real estate, if I wanted to know how much the customer is willing to spend, there's a couple different ways that I could get to that. So first of all, one thing I might want to ask would be, what is your idea of a price range? So they might give you, $100,000 to $200,000. Well, if I know that, then I know that I'm not going to show them $300,000 homes. I might also ask, what kind of neighborhood do you envision yourself in? So if they're talking about, a very elite neighborhood, but their budget's only $100,000, I know that I'm going to have to do some account management there to help bring them into a realistic search framework, because they're going to be very disappointed if they have, again, champagne tastes on a beer budget, right? Skipping forward, let's look at office supplies. What are some things that we could think about to understand somebody buying office supplies or office equipment? One thing that I might ask them for office equipment would be, when was the last time you bought a new copier? Or how long is the lease on your copier? Tell me about your experience with this copier. That might tell me that, how satisfied they are or how dissatisfied they are. And if I hear or understand some dissonance in their satisfaction, that they might be dissatisfied, that might give me an opportunity. I want you to realize that it's not just about getting new prospects. We want to build long-term relationships that create value. So it's also about managing your account base. This is a skill that's specific for professional salespeople, and it's called managing your pipeline. You want to always have new prospects coming in to start filling the top of the pipeline, but then you also need to understand how to manage people and organizations through the pipeline. So what you would do is you would manage your list by keeping very specific data about the account name, the contact person, and recent contacts. And then you would also want to keep notes about things or items of interest that occur during your sales calls that might be relevant for future sales calls. The portfolio model mentioned in your text can be very effective. I want you to think about which prospects, which customers can you best service, as well as which customers can bring the most value to your organization. In my experience, there are a lot of salespeople that spend way too much time on what would be called the drag accounts. So these are accounts that have really minimal opportunity for large dollar amounts in sales, and then also are really not well positioned for what you do as a company. So for example, let's say that we are working with a company and we can create some customized service solutions. And a particular company constantly wants something highly customized. And while they may have a lot of potential in terms of a high dollar amount, they have typically been very loyal to one of our competitors. Since they are very loyal to a competitor, there's not a lot of opportunity there for us. And the fact that we have to completely customize for them all the time really puts it in kind of a weak position as a valuable customer. So bottom line is make sure that you're thinking strategically about the accounts that you go after, and they have high opportunity and they are a good fit for your company strategically. Here's another visual of the sales funnel that's important to understand. Any professional salesperson is going to be asked to do a forecast. Typically, it will be done based around an individual forecast of sales by customer. And so you would have to categorize them in the pipeline. And so on the left, you can see that there might be a large potential for new customers or prospects for sales. But when we really get down to the nitty gritty of the analysis, that's always going to be smaller, right? But then perhaps maybe we've got a larger percentage of qualified sales lead that can contribute to the bottom line. What's important here is to understand, number one, the importance of forecasting and its function. And then number two, how that different makeup between prospects and qualified, where they are in the sales process, can greatly affect your forecast as a salesperson. And here's an example of the pipeline that I mentioned before. So it's important for a salesperson to really understand and have a good handle on the expected flow of sales from prospect to basically closing, to understand what your forecast is going to be for your company. So from this chapter, it's important to understand the prospect, how to develop prospects, how to create that base and where they come from, and what you can do as an individual to create a base, and then how to qualify them and organize that data.